Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at the psychology and tactics behind conspiracy theories. Our sources this time are a collection of conspiracy theory tips and conspiracy design principles.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're written almost as like a tongue-in-cheek, like how-to guide for crafting a compelling theory. And you'll quickly see why understanding these tactics can be so valuable.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like, you're learning the magician's secrets. Once you know how the tricks are done, you can see through the illusion. And I think by recognizing these tactics, the tactics used to build conspiracy theories, you can become a more discerning consumer of information.
Yeah. So let's unpack this a little bit. One of the tips emphasizes plausibility. So basically the idea is that even if the theory isn't entirely believable, it needs to have at least like a kernel of truth to hook the audience.
Right.
You know,
Exactly. And it's really interesting how that then, connects to the principle of exploiting tribalism.
yeah.
So by tapping into, pre-existing beliefs or anxieties of a certain group, a conspiracy theory can make its audience feel like they're part of a special group, that they're like in the know while everyone else is oblivious. And that in turn, it creates this kind of us versus them dynamic that really strengthens the appeal of the theory.
So it's not just about the information itself,
Right.
but it's about how it makes people feel, like they belong to a select group with special knowledge or something like that.
Precisely. And that sense of belonging, can be very, very powerful, especially when a theory kind of plays on those deep-seated fears or anxieties that people have.
hmm Another tip that caught my eye was the idea of downplaying complexity with generalizations and cliches.
Mm.
It's almost like saying, don't worry about the details, just trust your gut.
Yeah. That's a great observation. And that actually leads us to one of, I think the most crucial aspects of a lot of these conspiracy theories, appealing to emotion rather than logic. So instead of presenting, complex evidence or arguments, these theories really rely on triggering those strong emotions like fear, anger, or outrage.
So instead of trying to convince people through like facts and logic and, it's more about bypassing that and just tapping directly into their emotional responses.
Exactly. And quite often that emotional appeal is combined with a sense of urgency as well. So you might hear phrases like, wake up sheeple, or
Mm.
they don't want you to know this. These kinds of things that are designed to create, this sense of panic or fear that can really shut down rational thinking.
Yeah, that's scary. It really makes you realize how easily people can be manipulated when their, emotions are running high.
Yeah.
But wouldn't appealing to emotion over logic, wouldn't that alienate people who value evidence and critical thinking?
Well, you might think so. But, we have to remember that these successful conspiracy theories, they don't aim to convince everyone. They often target specific groups who might already be predisposed to accept these kinds of narratives.
Okay, so it's about finding an audience that's receptive to the message,
Yeah.
even if it's not, even if it's based more on emotion than logic.
Yeah, and this is where the tactic of projection comes in. This is a psychological defense mechanism
Yeah.
where we attribute our own, unacceptable feelings or thoughts to other people.
Oh, so like if I believe that like I'm secretly capable of doing something dishonest, I might be more likely to believe that others are dishonest as well.
Exactly. And conspiracy theories often leverage this by suggesting that, powerful people or institutions are acting in ways that the audience might imagine themselves acting, in similar situations. So it creates a sense of, well, if I would do that, then they probably are too.
Huh, that's fascinating. That makes me wonder like how much of our belief in these conspiracy theories is really driven by our own like subconscious biases and projections.
Yeah, well, that's the question, isn't it? But I think by understanding these psychological mechanisms, we can really start to see how even these seemingly outlandish conspiracy theories can gain so much traction, by exploiting our own natural tendencies.
This is really giving me a whole new perspective on how these theories are constructed. So we've got plausibility, tribalism, appealing to emotion, and even projection all playing a role. It's like a recipe for crafting a compelling narrative.
And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore. So we'll be back to delve a little deeper into how these tactics exploit our cognitive biases. And you know how things like confirmation bias can really solidify these beliefs in our minds. Welcome back. So before the break, we were discussing how these tactics like plausibility and exploiting tribalism can really make these conspiracy theories so compelling. Now let's dive a little deeper into how these theories exploit our cognitive biases. Those mental shortcuts our brains take to process information quickly?
It's amazing how our brains can be so brilliant and yet so susceptible to these kinds of tricks.
Mm.
What are some of the biases that make us particularly vulnerable to conspiracy theories?
Well, one of the most significant is confirmation bias, and this is basically our tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs, while ignoring or downplaying evidence that contradicts them.
So if you already believe that, like, say, large corporations are inherently untrustworthy, you might be more likely to accept a conspiracy theory that reinforces that belief, even if the evidence is weak.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that this bias isn't limited to people who believe in conspiracy theories. We all experience confirmation bias to some degree. It's a natural part of how our brains try to make sense of the world.
But it seems like confirmation bias can be especially problematic when it comes to conspiracy theories, because it can create this sort of self-reinforcing loop. The more you believe in a theory, the more you seek out information that confirms it, and the stronger that belief becomes, even if it's based on shaky ground.
Right. And this is where the tactic of cherry picking evidence comes in. Conspiracy theories often present only the information that supports their claims, while conveniently ignoring or dismissing any evidence that might contradict their narrative.
It's like creating a puzzle, but you only use the pieces that fit your predetermined picture. You might end up with something that looks convincing on the surface, but it's not a complete or accurate representation of the whole picture.
That's a great analogy. And this selective use of evidence can be very persuasive, especially when it's combined with, some of those other tactics we've talked about, like appealing to emotion and creating a sense of belonging to a special group.
So we've got confirmation bias, cherry-picking evidence. It feels like we're building a toolkit for critical thinking here,
Yeah.
helping listeners identify these red flags when they encounter them out in the wild.
Absolutely. And by understanding these tactics, you can better evaluate information, discern fact from fiction, and ultimately make more informed decisions.
Speaking of decisions, one of the conspiracy design principles we have here talks about exploiting uncertainty, especially during times of crisis. Why is that so effective?
Well, when people are feeling uncertain or anxious, as they often do during crises, they really crave explanations and a sense of control. Conspiracy theories offer these simple answers to complex problems, often blaming a specific group or individual for whatever's going wrong.
So in a way, these theories provide a false sense of comfort and control in a world that can often feel very chaotic and unpredictable.
That's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember that this desire for simple answers, it's a very natural human tendency. We all want to believe that the world makes sense and that there's someone in control.
But the danger is that we might latch onto these explanations that are overly simplistic or even completely false,
Yeah.
just because they offer us that sense of comfort and control.
Exactly. And this is why it's so important to be aware of these tendencies, especially during times of, uncertainty or crisis. When we're under stress, our rational faculties can be overwhelmed by our emotions, and that makes us much more vulnerable to manipulation.
So what can we do about it? How can we protect ourselves from these tactics,
Yeah.
especially during those times of uncertainty?
Well, it all starts with awareness. By understanding the tactics that are used to construct and spread these conspiracy theories, you can be more critical of the information that you encounter. And remember, critical thinking isn't about, dismissing every unconventional idea. It's about evaluating the evidence carefully and considering different perspectives.
So it's more about asking the right questions and being open to changing our minds when presented with new information, rather than just blindly accepting or rejecting everything we hear.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a healthy skepticism, questioning your own biases, and being willing to change your mind when presented with new information.
That's powerful. It's about empowering ourselves to be more discerning consumers of information, regardless of the source.
And it's about recognizing that even these seemingly harmless conspiracy theories, they can have real-world consequences. They can influence people's behavior and even shape political discourse.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we've seen how this misinformation can spread rapidly online, leading to distrust in institutions, social division, and even violence.
Which is why it's more important than ever to be vigilant, to think critically, and to engage in, constructive dialogue based on evidence and reason.
This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's amazing how these seemingly simple tactics can have such a profound impact on our perceptions and beliefs.
And remember, these tactics aren't limited to the realm of conspiracy theories. They can be used in all sorts of contexts, from advertising and marketing to political campaigns and social movements.
That's a sobering thought. It
Yeah.
makes you realize that we need to be critical thinkers in all aspects of our lives, not just when we're, scrolling through social media or watching the news.
Absolutely. It's about developing a mindset of questioning, of seeking evidence, and of being open to changing your mind when presented with new information.
And it's about understanding that we're all susceptible to these tactics,
Hmm.
regardless of our intelligence or education.
Precisely. We all have biases and vulnerabilities, and it's only by recognizing them that we can start to protect ourselves from manipulation.
This has been an incredible journey into the psychology of conspiracy theories and the tactics used to spread them. And now as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how technology, particularly social media, has become this breeding ground for these theories to flourish and spread like wildfire. Okay, so we've been unpacking the psychology and tactics behind conspiracy theories. You know, those kernels of truthiness mixed with a whole lot of appealing but not necessarily accurate narratives. Now let's talk about how technology, particularly social media, has become like their perfect breeding ground.
It really has. I mean, the internet and especially social media has been a total game changer for conspiracy theories. You've got algorithms prioritizing engagement, so content that triggers those strong emotions, even if it's totally false, that stuff can spread like wildfire.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see these outrageous claims trending all the time, right?
Oh,
Everything from wild celebrity rumors to elaborate theories about, you know, like global events. It's almost like the more sensational it is, the faster it spreads.
Exactly. And that's all compounded, of course, by the echo chamber effect. Social media tends to connect us with like-minded people, which ends up reinforcing existing beliefs. Even when they're, well, not based on solid evidence, you're much less likely to encounter opposing views in that situation, so it can lead to this phenomenon called group polarization, essentially. Those beliefs just become more and more extreme over time.
So you're saying social media doesn't just help these theories spread faster, it actually helps them become more entrenched in people's minds.
Pretty much. That's why media literacy and critical thinking are so crucial now. You need to be able to evaluate info from different sources, figure out how credible it is, and even be willing to challenge your own assumptions, even the ones shared by your online communities.
I guess it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a shared belief, but taking that step back to actually analyze things critically, that's really important.
It is. Remember, the internet isn't always this neutral source of information. It can be a really powerful tool for, well, manipulation, propaganda, all of that. Being aware of that is a good first step.
It all sounds a bit daunting, to be honest. With so much information out there, how can people navigate this whole online world and not fall prey to these tactics?
Well, just by tuning into this deep dive, you've taken a huge first step, right? Recognizing those biases and how algorithms can shape your perception, that's key. Being more mindful of what you click on, what you share, who you're trusting online, that can make a world of difference.
So it's about personal responsibility too then, like not just passively consuming whatever comes our way, but really taking an active role.
Absolutely. Try diversifying your information sources. Maybe seek out perspectives that actually challenge your views. And if something sounds suspicious, fact check it using reliable sources. Don't be afraid to question things, even if they're coming from sources you generally trust.
So basically what we've been saying, that critical thinking is like a muscle that we need to work out online and off.
Exactly. The more you develop those skills, the better equipped you'll be to engage in constructive dialogue, you'll be more resilient to manipulation, and you'll just be a more informed person overall.
This has been such an insightful deep dive, honestly. It's fascinating how these tactics, which might seem simple at first, can have such a huge impact on, well, how we see the world and what we end up believing.
And it's important to remember that even if some of these theories seem harmless, just for fun,
Hmm.
they can have real consequences. They affect our actions, our beliefs, even our political systems.
So it's bigger than just debunking specific theories, right?
Yeah.
It's about understanding why we're drawn to them and then equipping ourselves with those critical thinking skills we've been talking about to make sense of it all.
That's it. And by doing that, we can be better citizens, more responsible with the information we consume, and better able to actually shape the world around us based on, evidence and reason.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. This has been a really fascinating look into this world of conspiracy theories, a world that's honestly much more complex and impactful than we might realize at first glance.
Absolutely. And always remember, a healthy bit of skepticism, that questioning attitude, and a commitment to seeking the truth, that's the best antidote we have for misinformation, even if that truth ends up being uncomfortable sometimes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of conspiracy theories. Stay curious, stay critical, and keep exploring the world out there. Just do it with an open mind and a good dose of skepticism.